Hi guys, welcome back to another video. This is a special video I've been waiting I've been waiting for to be able to make for a while. 50 subscriber special. So I guess when I started YouTubing regular, um, I had I don't know I had sorry, it said it wasn't a great connection. Um, anyway, when I started again back getting into streaming regularly. Um, I don't know how, like 40 something subscribers, and now I have 52, which I'm super jazzed about. I know that any small thing could vault that into the hundreds or the thousands, but I'm less a publicist than I am just an educator and a guy who's interested in talking about things. It'd be great to have hundreds or thousands of subscribers, but I'm going to keep doing this, whether it's 50 or 50,000 or whatever. So you have to celebrate your little milestones or whatever. So I don't know what happened, but I jumped from 48 to 52 like kind of overnight or something a couple nights ago, and I was like really surprised by that. But whatever, I'll take them. So you think, well, okay, so what am I going to do for this 50 subscriber special? Well, I thought, why don't I do every 50th page, see if I can provide a context and see what's going on every 50th page of War and Peace. War and Peace is, as my regular viewers know, my favorite novel, and it's been my favorite novel since I was, I don't know, 16 or 17. It's really cold today. Well, it's 10 degrees, but there's no sunlight or anything, so it seems really frigid. Anyway, that's good Russian weather for you. So I've loved War and Peace for many years and read it many times, but I usually the first edition I had was the Penguin Classics edition, and I picked up this one a few years ago, nice hardcover, and I think I got it for a good price. Yeah, it was $10, so that's all right. And it's a beautiful big print. I've never read this edition. Okay, I've never read this volume before, and so it's the mod translation, which English readers of Tolstoy know that Almer and the husband and wife, who were friends of Leo Tolstoy, actually, who lived with him for part of his old age, they translated his works into English, and these editions are still circulating. Louise and Almer Maude, they were real Tolstoyans. They followed his teachings and so on. So anyway, this volume is 1943 by Macmillan Co. and Oxford University Press. So this edition, oh, it's longer than I thought. This edition is 1,352 pages. Sorry, 1,352 pages. So I'm going to jump every 50 pages and see where that gets us, and see if I can provide context. So the first jump, of course, is only going to be 49 pages, because I'm going to start with page 1 and then jump to page 50. So, well, let's assume that page 1 is the first page of print. No, actually, page 3 is. So my first jump will be only 47 pages. So, War and Peace, for those who don't know, was a massive work set around set around a couple families and a couple Russian families in the time of the Napoleonic Wars, and culminates with Napoleon's conquest of Moscow and subsequent retreat, and then the aftermath of that. Um, it focuses on the domestic life of the main characters, and it also focuses on the war. A few of the main characters are soldiers, especially Prince Andrei and what's his name, Nikolai. Um, and Andrei is killed. Well, I shouldn't spoil that now, but Nikolai is not. So this is the ultimate story of Russian life, and it is as it focuses more on the domestic side of things: love, loss, death, marriage, birth, all these things, um, spiritual exploration, and all that. As much as it does the war, in fact, even more than it focuses on the war. But its accounts of the war are by no means just simple context, simple window dressing or something. No, there's an amazing exploration of the war itself, and Tolstoy describes in amazing detail several of the battles, especially the Battle of Borodino, which was the big battle that basically sealed Moscow's fate. Uh, it was sort of a draw, but then the Russian forces retreated to the east of Moscow and basically gave up Moscow to Napoleon. And as most of you know, that ultimately it's kind of a Pyrrhic victory in a way, that once he conquered Moscow, it was kind of futile, that there was no point to it. The Russians would never yield to him. They would never obey him. They'd never change their ways. They'd never abandon the Tsar, anything like that. So it was basically Napoleon had to withdraw, and he lost a lot of his army in the Russian winter amongst very hostile people and a very hostile climate. So let's start. And the starting is just as powerful as any other. Um, so book one, it's what, 5 books or something. So book one, chapter one begins. Well, Prince, so Genoa and Lucca are now just family estates of the Bonapartes. But I warn you, if you don't tell me that this means war, if you still try to defend the infamies and horrors perpetrated by that Antichrist, I really believe he is Antichrist, I will have nothing more to do with you, and you are no longer my friend, etc., etc. So this is the opening scene of a party in amongst some of the Russian elite, and it sets the context right away in Napoleonic, the Napoleonic era. So let's jump to page 50. Page 50. We're in book one, chapter 6, and the title of the chapter. This great thing about this particular edition is that at the top of of each page, it tells you in a few words what's going on, and the chapters here have a description as well. That wasn't the case with the Penguin Classics edition that I grew up with, but this is really cool. I like this, and it says basically, Anna Mikhailovna and Boris go to the dying Count Bezukhov, and Count Bezukhov dies quickly, and he ends up uh, giving his estate to Pierre Bezukhov, who is really the main character in the whole novel. If anyone's the main character, it's this Pierre Bezukhov. So he was Bezukhov. Pierre was an illegitimate child, and it was surprising that he was the one who received the inheritance, and he becomes Count Bezukhov, and he is, as I said, the most important character in the book, and he makes a sort of discreet entrance into the novel. Okay, so page 100, we have a conversation between Andrew and Lise. Andrew is often just left as Andre. Andreich, I don't know what his name would be in the Russian, but some English editions translate it as Andre, some translate it as Andrew. I just got my first person commenting there. This never happened before, but that's good. Signs of growth. All right, even though it's my brother. So on page 100, we just have a conversation between Prince Andrew and his sister, Lise. And we're going to jump ahead to 150. So on page 150, we are in in the battle. We are this particular page is focused on Denisov. Denisov was he was like a sergeant or something. He was a low ranking in the military, but he was a real soldier. And he in this story he has kind of as a lisp or something. And it said the main family's name is Rostov, and he can't pronounce his R's, so it's always translated as Wostov. And Denisov basically becomes an old salt, good friend of the Rostov family, and Nikolai Rostov. So he's involved. This is the crossing of the Ends. These are some battles. I guess we're in 1805. So the story starts in 1805, and ends with, of course, the invasion of Russia in 1812. So okay, let's jump ahead. We're making good progress here. Page 200. Okay. We're in the battle here, and I have to admit defeat here because I don't know which battle we're talking about. But the characters that jump out are Rostov. So we've got the young Rostov, must be Nikolai Rostov, who is one of the main characters, but not really the main character. And then we have and he encounters Prince Andrei as well. Prince Andrei outranks Rostov. He's the what's their last name? Andrew. Anyway, Andrew and Lisa's family are very very high noble, and then the Rostovs are sort of a poorer amongst the middle class. So we have an encounter here between different characters, and in the early battles, Prince Andrei and Count, or I don't know if can you be a count before your dad is dead? I'm not sure if he's a count yet or not. I don't know how. I can't remember how that works. Anyway, there's scene there between in these early battles, Prince Andrei and Count Nikolai. They do distinguish themselves for their bravery and so on in these initial skirmishes, but they don't really like each other. So we're on page 250 now. So here we have this beautiful stuff here. At the top of the page, it says a letter from Nicholas. So Nicholas, again, Nicholas Rostov, he is probably the second most important character's brother, and that second most important character is Natasha. So ultimately, Natasha, main character, and Pierre, main character, get married, but it takes 1,000 pages to get there. So at this point, they're younger. Okay, so we're in 1805, and the story will conclude around 1812. So we've got 7 years of aging. So they're little girls at this point. So Natasha's a little girl, like 12, 13, something like that. And when she'll get up to about 20, I guess, by the end of the book. A bit more, actually, because there's some aftermath. And she lives with her cousin, Sonia. And Sonia lost her parents, and basically the Rostovs adopted her, and she grew up with them. And she falls in love with her cousin, Nicholas. But Nicholas loves her too. But it's a childhood love. It's a childhood love, and ultimately they can't get married because the Rostovs are basically bankrupt, and they need to marry somebody who has money. Okay, and that's basically how the Bulkonski family and the Rostov family connect. I think I've got that right. Okay, and then the Bezukovs, of course, and the Rostovs connect as well through Pierre. So this is Nicholas writing a letter from the front, and it's beautiful how Sonia reacts to it and all that stuff, and they kind of keep it from. They got to kind of keep their love out of the mother, Mrs. Countess Rostov's eyes, because she can't have her son marrying somebody with no inheritance when the family is on such hard financial times. Okay, so at page 300, we're right in the Battle of Austerlitz. So Austerlitz, for those who don't know, was one of Napoleon's most famous victories, and Tolstoy provides an amazing presentation of the battle. This is part of the reason why Tolstoy has no equal. The research he put into the history to write this, and his ability to narrate and so on are amazing. So Battle of Austerlitz is a crushing defeat for the Russians and the Austrians, I guess, and really seals Napoleon's his hold on Europe for the next decade, as it were. So sad. On page 350, the chapter is called, and we're in book 4 now, chapter 9. This chapter is called The Death of Lise. Lise is Prince Andrei's sister. Gosh, I hope I got that right. Yes, Prince Andrei's wife, sorry. Lise is Prince Andrei's wife. His wife. Say his first and his only wife. Although you think he's going to marry Natasha later or eventually. Lise was his first and only wife, and she dies basically, what do they call it? Puerperal fever or whatever? What happens to a woman when she dies after childbirth or whatever. It's from the bacteria and stuff that they had very little resistance to in that time in terms of medication and so on. They say that doctors' unwashed hands killed more babies and mothers than anything, but they didn't know at the time. So Prince Andrei is left a widower, and he has a young child. Yes, and that's okay. So I'm starting to remember. I'm starting to put 2 and 2 together here now. So Andrei's son will be raised by Andrei's son. No, anyway, I don't want to get too off track here. So his first wife dies in childbirth. Okay, there's you go. All right, let's jump up to page. I'm not doing super great here, but I'm doing okay. So let's jump up to page 400. Sorry, pages sticking together here. Page 400. Okay, old Bulkonski and Prince Andrew. So this old Bulkonski is a really interesting character. He's one of those super rich, super gruff, old-fashioned guys, and I don't know if it comes from Tolstoy himself or it comes from my imagination, but I have a real picture of their setting, their house, their situation, just whether it's from repeated readings or from my imagination or whatever. But they didn't have Andrei or Andrew and his sister Mary didn't have the best relationship with their father. Their father was very, as I said, he was just not he was just I suppose old-fashioned or whatever. And father-son relationships for Tolstoy were kind of funny because Tolstoy's mother died when he was super young, and his father died when he was, I guess, a teenager. So parental relationships are kind of funny for him. Okay, so page 450 is the last page in this issue anyway of book 3. So, and we have basically it's focused on Rostov here, and the emperors remounted and rode away. So this is basically, it's kind of neat. There's a meeting between the Emperor Alexander and Napoleon after these defeats, Russia's defeats at Napoleon's hands, and there's basically Russia's obliged to form a treaty type situation with Napoleon. And all right, so we're back to family matters now. We're away from the war for a little while anyway. And on page 500, we have, sorry, I'm just trying to get there. So on page 500, so we have Natasha's a debutante, I guess, and she goes to her first ball. She basically falls head over heels for Prince Andrew, and obviously Prince Andrew's older, but they basically kind of fall in love or whatever. And she's a young woman just entering in society, and now he's a widower. So there's a bit of an age gap there, and he's been to war, and she's, so. But anyway, they strike up a relationship, and as you can probably anticipate, it's not going to go well in the sense that he's a big military man in the middle of a huge international stuff with Napoleon, and she's just a little idealistic little girl. So page 550, where are we now? One of these are okay. So this is a really neat. This is something that's cool about Napoleon. Every time I say Napoleon, I mean Tolstoy, and every time I say Tolstoy, I say Napoleon. Anyway, one of this around page 550, we're at one of those very cool passages, hunting passages. Tolstoy loved to hunt himself, and this is a very famous, as all the scenes in War and Peace are famous. This is a famous scene where Natasha and Nikolai and the Rostovs go out hunting, and it's super cool in terms of the literary quality and character and so on. And it's it's a cool moment where the relationship between Nikolai and his cousin, I said her name a few minutes ago, are strengthened and furthered, Sonia. And it's sort of, they're really at the peak of their romance, I guess, at this point. Page 600. So so we're finally talking about Pierre. Pierre, again, is the main character, but we haven't talked about Pierre just by fluke we haven't landed on any Pierre passages in our 50-page jumps. So this is a book 8, chapter 4, and it's entitled Pierre and Princess Mary Discuss Boris and Natasha. So it's kind of funny. I mean, Boris is a young, we saw this Boris earlier, who was trying to get some of the money from old Bezikov, who basically inherited Pierre, and this Boris got a bit of the money. He becomes a young soldier who's pretty cocksure of himself, and he puts his attention on Natasha, which a lot of people kind of fall in love with Natasha because she's such a cutie and she's perky and idealistic and whatever. Just picture your ideal woman. Natasha is Tolstoy's ideal woman, and we see her as a girl here. And so it says Pierre, who's quite a bit older than Natasha, talking about Natasha, who he ultimately marries, and her kind of romance with this young little Boris. But she doesn't stay connected to Boris very long. She actually prefers Prince Andrew. So let's jump ahead to 650. Okay, we're back. We're with Pierre, and one thing you got to know about Pierre is he has 2 marriages in the book. The first marriage is to a wealthy woman named Helen, or Eileen, and it doesn't go well. He doesn't love her. He doesn't marry her because he loves her. He marries her because she's rich. Yeah, she's good looking and all that stuff. But I think Tolstoy tells us, if not explicitly, then in so many words, that they never consummate their marriage. Um, and at this passage here on page 650, Pierre has to deal with uh, a man's inappropriate conduct with his wife, and the guy's name is Anatole. And basically, Pierre's a big, soft, squishy guy, but and Tolstoy obviously sees some of himself in Pierre. Tolstoy was a big man, a big, strong man, but he wasn't fat. This Pierre is fat, at least sort of fat or whatever. And we're talking about 1800s fat, not 21st century fat. So those are two different fats. Um, so this is a passage where it shows the dysfunctionality between Pierre and his wife Helen, and ultimately Helen dies. I believe she kills herself ultimately, but she's everything. She's the opposite of Natasha in every way. Okay, blah blah blah. All right, so we're on page 700. We're in a social scene here. Trying to figure out what's going on here. It's mentioning the Tsarevich and all that stuff. So, and General Barclay. So we've got a scene here um, in the highest echelons of society, and the only main character that takes us into those settings is Prince Andrei. It's Andrew, and because he's such a high-ranking nobleman, and he's in the army, and he does well in the army, and his father's so rich and important that Prince Prince Andrew's basically our foray into the highest society, and it's important. What the high society does in War and Peace is important because Tolstoy. The point of War and Peace is to contemplate basically history and human life, and is there meaning in history, and is there meaning in human life. So some of the most famous and most beautiful passages of War and Peace are um, philosophical discussions on history and meaning and the forces of history and so on. So Tolstoy brings us into those echelons, in this case through Prince Andrew. All right, so page 750, and we're at the very end of book 9, and I see Fatherland and Pierre and all that stuff. The Emperor's speech in Moscow. So we see, yeah, it's not actually. So it's at some nobleman's function or whatever, and we see uh, uh, Count Rostov, the father of Natasha and Nikolai, at this event or whatever. Okay, so let's jump ahead to page 800. So we're making good progress here. We got a ways to go, but we're making good progress. All right. So we're back in the. Okay, so we're talking about Princess Mary. So Princess Mary is Prince Andrew's sister, and this Princess Mary will ultimately marry Nikolai Rostov. Okay, so that's where we get the connection between the Bulkonski and the Rostov families. And Princess Mary is an interesting character. Um, she's quiet, she's kind of pious, she's religious, and all that stuff. And you can tell that Tolstoy has a lot of admiration for Princess Mary. Um, in that way, she's obsequious, she's respectful, even though her father is not the nicest man in the world. She's very subservient, and I think Tolstoy really respects her Christian humility. Okay, doesn't fit very well into modern feminism or whatever, but Tolstoy really admired this kind of um, daughter's humility and all that stuff. Okay, so on page 850, we're at one of the most powerful. Um, we're at we're kind of moving towards one of the climaxes, which is Prince Andrew's development. Prince Andrew is friends with Pierre, but they and they're both on a path. They're both on a spiritual journey, and I think that in a way they represent two sides of Leo Tolstoy and his own conception about how his life went or could have went or should have went or something. So Prince Andrew um, is more. He has Tolstoy's aristocratic side, and Tolstoy did have an aristocratic side. He spent his later years trying to diminish it, his aristocratic presuppositions and pride and so on. But Prince Andrew was everything, in a way, everything the young Tolstoy wanted to be: dashing, handsome, and accomplished in the military. Tolstoy had served in the military as well. And he's friends with Pierre, and both of them, I mean, and Pierre is the intellectual, the quiet intellectual, kind of slothful, lazy guy who kind of doesn't do much with himself. And obviously Tolstoy found himself like that as well. And if you read Tolstoy's letters from his as a young man, you'll see that he was really at war with himself, two different conceptions of who he was and so on. So here we have basically conversations between Pierre and Prince Andrew, and kind of them kind of working out these contradictory sides of the author's character, right? All right. So page 900. I see Andrew's name here. Okay, so we're in the middle of battle. So Pierre, say, after the sufferings he had been enduring, Prince Andrew enjoyed a blissful feeling such as he had not had experienced for a long time. All the best and happiest moments of his life, especially his earliest childhood, when he used to be undressed and put into bed, and when leaning over him, his nurse sang in his sleep, and he burying his head in the pillow, felt healthy in the mere consciousness of life, returned to his memory, not merely as something past, but as something present. The doctors were busily engaged with the wounded man, with the wounded man, the shape of whose head seemed familiar to Prince Andrew. They were shifting him and trying to quiet him. And it looks like, okay, so he recognizes this Anatole, who, remember, so this Anatole who gets involved with Pierre's wife Helen is the guy here, and he's been injured. So Prince Andrew has been injured in the war, and he has a very brave, heroic moment where he picks up the standard of the army and reverses the retreat of his regiment, and then he's shot. So he doesn't die this time, but this is how Prince Andrew and Natasha get connected, because as the Russian forces and families are withdrawing east, and this includes now the Rostovs, so Natasha and so on, Natasha gets reconnected with Prince Andrew. And one thing we skipped over was that Natasha disappointed Prince Andrew at one point, because she has a little incident with, again, this Anatole. I believe it's the same guy that was messing with Helen. So that's a whole other incident, and that disappoints Prince Andrew, and he kind of breaks off with Natasha. And then they get reconnected because Natasha nurses Prince Andrew on the retreat from Moscow. So as it's happening. So jump into page 950, we see that it's the Rostovs leave Moscow. So it's really cool in this way, because when you're studying Napoleonic history, you don't really think of the impact it had on families. You just think of set piece battles taking place in empty fields, and that it didn't have any impact on civilians. But of course it did. Of course, not as much as, say, World War II, where we have carpet bombing and all that stuff, but still, there's a profound impact on people, and especially when Napoleon ends up taking Moscow. So the Rostovs leave. As you know, Russia's endless. It goes on for thousands of miles through Siberia. So that's what the Russian army does. They begin to retreat. All right, so we're jumping up to page 1000 now. Let's see what's happened since then. All right, page 1000. Okay, I see we're back. This is the battle. The war is coming to a peak here, and I can see that we're still looking. We're looking at the battle stuff. Pierre. Oh yes, Pierre's in Moscow, and Pierre gets this idea in his head that he has a destiny. So remember, Pierre isn't in the army, but he kind of liked to sort of watch and see what the military is doing. Remember, he's lazy and he didn't go into the army or anything. So he gets this idea in his head that his life has some kind of fatal importance, and he doesn't leave Moscow. He gets it in his mind that he's supposed to assassinate Napoleon. Okay, so that's kind of what we see here on page 1000 is Pierre sort of getting caught up in the French, with the French soldiers who are moving into Moscow. Okay, so page 1050. Page 1050. When he received the news of the Battle of Borodino and the abandonment of Moscow, Rostov was not seized by despair, anger, the desire for vengeance, or any feeling of the kind. But everything in Vorennes suddenly seemed to him dull and tiresome. Oh, how interesting. Okay, so we're looking at Nicholas here. Okay, so this is cool. So this is where Nicholas Rostov meets Princess Mary. So remember, Princess Mary is Prince Andrew's sister, and he basically comes to their rescue because basically, all the structure of their way of life is breaking down, and all the structure of the way of life is breaking down, and Princess Mary is basically left abandoned. I believe her father is now dead, and Prince Andrew is MIA. He's actually KIA, I believe, at this point. And so Nicholas, Count Nicholas, he becomes Princess Mary's savior and hero and all that stuff. And ultimately, that is a union that will last. And that means that poor old Sonia, who has loved Nicholas their whole lives and has lived with the family her whole life, has to become basically a spinster. Okay, there you go. That's life in the early 1800s. Okay, so we're at page 1100. The Battle of Tarutino. Okay, so we're back with Denisov, and Denisov is a really cool character. Oh wait, this is a different Denisov. Blah, blah, blah. Let's see if I got this right. Okay, Kutuzov is there. Kutuzov is the supreme commander of the Russian military and is a real cool character in this. He's a real cool character in this novel. So old Field Marshal Kutuzov is, in a way, the embodiment of history. He has his famous saying is patience and time. Okay, patience and time, and this is sort of a manifestation of history as well. It's in a way, historians talk about the great men view of history, that history is the creation of great men. So you focus on the Alexanders, the Napoleons, and the Caesars, and so on. Whereas in a way, this is trying out the thesis that's not true, and that history is full of inevitabilities. And that's one of the observations about Napoleon, is he's as much a victim of the inevitability of the world and history as anybody else. Napoleon's not making history. He's a part of history. He is a plaything of history in that sense. So here we have we're back in the military stuff, and I think let me just make sure. It looks like we're just talking about the friction that Kutuzov was suffering, because he, what's the word for it? He abandoned Moscow, and ultimately it was the right strategy, but he was, widely criticized for it. And so we're kind of dealing with some of that stuff here. So let's jump up to 1150. We're in 1812, book 14. 1150 here. Hang on a sec. Okay. This is a very sad moment here. So at 1150, we've got Denisov, the cool Wascally Wabbit guy who can't pronounce his R's. This sort of lifetime soldier, the old salt. And he's with Petya. Petya is Natasha's and Nicholas's younger brother. And Pete, you could call him Peter. Here it's translated as Petya. Peter dies. Peter's in a skirmish. He's too brave. He rides his horse out in front of Denisov and them, and he ends up getting shot and killed, and he dies. And it's a sad thing. He was just a boy. He was 16 or something, and he's one of these characters that express and explore the way that history works. And in this way, it's heartless, and it doesn't take any regard for someone's age or whatever. Okay, so book 15, page 1200. Kutuzov at Krasnoy. The Battle of Krasnoy. So this is when things are turning around for the Russians, of course. And the Russians are starting to drive the Russians, or drive the French in the other direction. Just trying to think of if anything significant happens with their characters at this battle. I don't think so. I think this is more just a discussion of how army is going, because I don't see any of the main characters mentioned in this area. Krasnoy. Okay, let's jump up to 1250. Ooh, we're in the first epilogue. So first epilogue. Obviously, if there's a first epilogue, there's a second epilogue. So let's see what's happening on page 1250 in the first epilogue. So the two epilogues, one is about the characters, and one is about history. It's a contemplation of history, and it's a philosophical thing. So at page 1250, we're in the middle of a philosophical discussion, forces operating in history. It's a weird way to end the novel, but again, certainly it's what Tolstoy wanted to talk about. He wanted to talk about the philosophy and all that stuff. And if we jump ahead to page 1300, which is the second last page we'll be looking at, okay, so this is cool. This is Nicholas Bulkonski. Okay, this is an interesting little passage. Basically, so the boy, Prince Andrew's son, that he has with his first wife is being raised now because Prince Andrew's dead, the first wife is dead. He is being raised by his uncle by marriage. So, who, remember, was his father's best friend, or not his, yeah, wow. They're all happy family in a way. Okay, so this passage here is this boy. So remember, so his aunt is Princess Mary, who's Andrew's sister. Andrew dies. Princess Mary marries Nicholas Rostov, and Nicholas Rostov and Mary have to raise Prince Andrei's son. And Nicholas isn't the best, warmest father. So there's a passage here where this Nicholas really makes a connection. This boy who's lost his parents, he makes a connection with Pierre, and Pierre becomes kind of his whatever, his favorite elder in a sense. It's kind of a nice little passage when you think that Tolstoy wasn't raised by his own mother and not completely by his own father either. And if we jump up to page 1350, we're back at the philosophy stuff. So he's talking about, the way history moves and so on. And of course, we have to go to the very last page. So 1350 we just looked at, and our last page is 1352. The last paragraph runs like this. Having wrongly or rightly become fully convinced of this in the course of my work, I naturally was unable, when describing the historical events of 1805, 1807, and especially of 1812, in which this law of predetermination is most prominently displayed, to attribute importance to the actions of those who thought they controlled the events, but who introduced less free human activity into them than did all the other participants. So the people who we think are making history are more the victims or the playthings of history than anybody else. The activity of these people interested me only as an illustration of the law of predetermination, which in my opinion guides history, and of that psychological law which compels a man who commits actions under the greatest compulsion to supply in his imagination a whole series of retrospective reflections to prove his freedom to himself. So what a cool way to end the novel. So basically he's saying that Napoleon and Count the Emperor Alexander and all these great generals think they control history, but they're the playthings of history and they're less free than anybody else. Okay, so there you go. Let me just conclude with, in 30 seconds or less, War and Peace achieves three things: good philosophy, good rational reflection, important ideas worth reflecting on; two, good historical presentation of the Napoleonic era; and number three, and I would say most importantly, it tells a beautiful story of Russian families in the early 19th century. And some of the most memorable characters you'll ever find are Natasha Rostov, Pierre Bezukhov, and the myriad dozens of others. But those are, and Prince Andrei, and so on. Anyway, thanks for listening, guys. And thanks for subscribing. And hopefully we'll have the 100th subscriber special in no time. Thanks so much, guys.